I'm Emily, 29, and for years I've kept a quiet plan that almost no one in my family knows about. Most Sundays, our extended relatives gather at my aunt's house, a warm place filled with loud conversations and too much dessert. My cousin Vanessa, 31, never misses a chance to turn these dinners into her own fashion show. She tells stories about designer handbags and surprise trips to Europe while everyone listens. I usually sit back and let her talk. I'm a landscape architect with a busy practice, and I like keeping my life private. At a summer barbecue a few years ago, Vanessa made a show of teasing me about my car, pointing out that it wasn't a statement vehicle. I laughed it off, but I'd already started something bigger than any flashy purchase. 5 years ago, I bought a wooded piece of land just outside the city. I'd been quietly designing and building a modern home there, handling much of the landscape design myself. Only my parents and my younger brother knew. Vanessa loves to assume that I envy her lifestyle. She talks as if my simple wardrobe and older apartment mean I'm stuck, but I never corrected her. My parents admire how I keep my plans to myself, and my brother thinks the reveal will be worth the wait. One holiday dinner, Vanessa joked in front of everyone that I was too boring to splurge on anything fun. A few relatives chuckled, and the rumor spread that I secretly wished for Vanessa's life. I just smiled and kept working on my project. I invested carefully, hired skilled contractors when needed, and managed every detail on a tight budget. Custom stonework and a rooftop garden were the finishing touches, and soon it would be ready. Another family brunch brought more digs from Vanessa. She called my small apartment permanent and said I'd never get ahead. I didn't bite. I knew my quiet approach would speak louder than any argument. Weeks later, I stood in the empty rooms of my nearly completed house, checking measurements for the final kitchen cabinets. The glass walls opened to the trees, and the rooftop garden framed the sky. My parents walked through with me, stunned by the design and the forest view. The last permits were nearly done when a small snag delayed the final inspection by a week. It didn't worry me. I focused on finishing touches, lighting the garden paths, arranging the minimalist furniture I'd chosen months ago. During that time, Vanessa kept making her rounds at family events. At a picnic, she bragged about an upcoming Maldives trip and called my life quiet. Later, she announced plans to buy a vacation home in Italy. The relatives murmured with admiration. When someone asked me about my weekends, I just said I was busy with a project. That answer sparked a little curiosity, but no suspicion. Soon, the custom furniture began arriving, each piece fitting the clean lines of the house. A neighbor stopped by while the movers worked and introduced himself. He offered help with move-in logistics and seemed impressed by how carefully everything was planned. When the final inspection finally cleared, I started arranging a small gathering. I invited family to a get-together at my place without any hint that it was a brand new home. My brother helped organize catering and parking, making sure the driveway could handle the cars. Word of the invitation reached Vanessa, and she scoffed, joking that my tiny apartment can't fit everyone. I didn't respond. I just kept setting the stage. The night before the gathering, I walked through each room. Candles and soft lights warmed the open spaces. Fresh flowers filled the kitchen. The rooftop garden glowed under subtle lanterns. After years of steady work and silence, everything was ready for the reveal. By the time the first guest would arrive, every assumption Vanessa had made about me would quietly fall apart. I'm Emily, 29, and the morning after my quiet walkthrough, I headed back to the house early to meet the contractors. The kitchen cabinets had arrived from the custom shop, and the team wanted final measurements before installing the long island and the floating shelves. The rooftop garden irrigation system also needed a last check. I walked room to room with the lead contractor, double-checking every detail against the plans. We adjusted the placement of a pendant light and marked the exact spot for the herb boxes on the roof. By noon, the installers had the schedule locked and promised a clean finish by the weekend. With the house nearly complete, I started planning the family gathering. I kept the invitation simple, just a casual get-together at my place. I didn't mention the new house or the rooftop garden. My brother agreed to handle catering and parking so I could focus on the reveal. We picked a Saturday evening 2 weeks away, enough time to finish the last touches and bring in furniture without rushing. Later that afternoon, I stopped in a small boutique downtown to look for a few accent pieces. I was browsing a rack of linen throws when Vanessa walked in with a friend. She held a glossy new purse with the logo turned outward and made sure everyone nearby saw it. She smiled wide, stepped close, and made a loud comment about how she loved finding pieces you can't get on a budget. I congratulated her on the bag, paid for a simple clay vase, and left without a pause. Her friend's eyebrows lifted as I walked out, and I could almost hear Vanessa's confusion behind me. That evening, my parents asked to see the house one more time before the big night. I met them at the driveway just as the sun dropped behind the trees. The stone pathway lights flicked on, casting a warm glow along the entrance. Inside, they moved slowly through each room, touching the smooth maple cabinets and running their hands across the cool stone counters. My father stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the forest view that stretched toward the horizon. My mother kept whispering that she couldn't believe I had kept something this big a secret for so long. While we talked, a neighbor from 2 houses down stopped by. He carried a small welcome basket with homemade bread and offered to help if I needed extra tables or chairs for the gathering. We chatted about parking, and he mentioned how much the other neighbors admired the modern design. The conversation stayed easy and practical, exactly what I wanted for this new chapter. The following week moved fast. A minor delay popped up when the city inspector requested one more signature for the rooftop garden drainage plan. It meant shifting the final inspection by a few days, but the contractors worked late to keep everything else on track. The kitchen cabinets went in smoothly, the pendant lights lined up perfectly, and the rooftop irrigation system tested without a single leak. Midweek, I joined my family for a picnic at a local park. Vanessa arrived late, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and carrying glossy brochures for her upcoming Maldives trip. She spread them out on the table and spoke loudly about private villas and over-water dinners while aunts and uncles gathered around. When conversation drifted toward home projects, she laughed and said my quiet weekends probably involved renting the same small apartment forever. I smiled and offered no explanation, only mentioning I'd been busy with a project that kept me outdoors. The cousins nodded politely, curiosity flickering, but no direct questions. The next morning, I met the delivery team, bringing in the first round of custom furniture. A sleek oak dining table slid perfectly into the open space near the kitchen. Deep charcoal sofas filled the living room, their lines matching the steel frames of the windows. Upstairs, the rooftop garden took shape with planters of lavender, thyme, and rosemary. Lanterns lined the walkway, casting soft light as evening approached. As the weekend neared, I sent out the official invitations for the gathering. Simple text messages and emails, Saturday evening, casual dinner, come hungry. My brother confirmed the caterer and arranged for extra parking along the long driveway. News of the invite reached Vanessa almost immediately. She called a cousin to laugh about how my tiny apartment couldn't possibly host everyone. The cousin later shared the comment with me, and I just shrugged. The more certain Vanessa felt about her assumptions, the better the surprise would be. 2 days before the event, the city inspector arrived for the final walkthrough. He checked every system carefully, electrical, plumbing, rooftop drainage. With a quick signature, the house passed without issue. I spent the rest of that day arranging flowers and placing candles along the hallway shelves. Fresh white lilies and soft greenery filled the air with a subtle scent. The final evening before the gathering, the rooftop garden glowed under the soft lanterns. My brother stopped by with the catering crew to double-check the setup. Tables and chairs fit neatly along the patio, leaving space for guests to wander among the herbs and flowers. He tested the outdoor speakers, letting a mellow acoustic playlist drift through the night air. Early Saturday morning, I woke to a quiet house surrounded by trees. The sun slid through the large windows, highlighting every detail I had worked for years to create. The caterer arrived mid-morning with trays of fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and a spread of desserts. My brother guided the parking team, marking spots along the drive and placing lanterns near the entrance. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Candles flickered in glass holders, soft music played through hidden speakers. The scent of rosemary and baked bread filled the air. I changed into a simple dress and walked each room one more time, making sure every space looked as planned. As dusk settled, the first cars pulled into the driveway. My parents arrived early to greet guests and help with last-minute details. Aunts, uncles, and cousins followed, their voices carrying excitement as they stepped through the front door. I stayed near the entrance, welcoming each person and watching their expressions shift from polite expectation to open surprise as they realized this striking modern house was mine. Relatives wandered through the open rooms, pausing at the rooftop garden and leaning over the balcony to see the forest stretching beyond. Questions came quickly. How long had I been working on it? Who designed the kitchen? When had I moved in? I answered simply and guided them toward the dining area where the food waited. Vanessa was the last to arrive, fashionably late as always. She walked up the stone path with her usual confident stride, expecting a rented venue or someone else's home. When I opened the door, she stopped short, her eyes sweeping the high ceilings and glass walls. For a moment, she said nothing, taking in the space while other guests watched with quiet amusement. The night filled with conversation and laughter. Relatives explored every corner, snapping photos of the rooftop garden and the custom stonework. Vanessa eventually managed a stiff compliment about the design, but her usual stream of boasts never came. The gathering stretched late into the night, the warm glow of lanterns reflecting off the windows while music played softly in the background. By the time the last guest left, the house felt alive with the sound of family and the quiet satisfaction of a plan that had unfolded exactly as intended. The city inspector returned early on a bright Monday morning, clipboard in hand. He checked every room and ran through the rooftop garden's drainage system with a careful eye. After a final look at the electrical panel, he signed the last line of the paperwork and handed me the occupancy approval. The house was officially mine to live in. By midweek, my brother and 2 close friends helped with the move. A rental truck backed slowly down the long driveway while we carried boxes and furniture through the wide glass doors. We worked from dawn until late evening, filling each room with the pieces I had collected over the past year. My brother anchored the dining table in the main space while a friend arranged books on the built-in shelves. We kept the address quiet, sharing it only with those helping that day. That first night after the movers left, the house settled into silence. I stepped out onto the rooftop garden where the soft lanterns glowed against the dark sky. The forest stretched into shadow, and the air carried a faint scent of pine. Stars scattered across the clear night while the low hum of the city stayed far in the distance. News of the move spread through the family faster than I expected. By the next weekend, several aunts and uncles had heard that I'd left the apartment, but no one knew where. I kept my social media blank, posting nothing about the house or the gathering. When a cousin texted to ask for the new address, I replied that details would come soon. Vanessa grew restless. She called a mutual cousin to dig for information, but the cousin only knew that I'd moved to a quieter area outside the city. Vanessa tried a few leading questions about whether I was renting or staying with friends. Nothing came back to her except that I was busy with a project. With the house ready and curiosity building, I planned the formal housewarming. I booked a caterer to set up an outdoor spread of fresh breads, grilled vegetables, and small desserts. A local acoustic duo agreed to play soft music on the rooftop garden. My brother mapped parking along the driveway and arranged lanterns to guide guests from the road to the entrance. The day before the gathering, I finished the final touches inside. Fresh white lilies and branches of eucalyptus filled tall vases in the main room. Candles sat in glass holders along the hallways. The kitchen counters gleamed under pendant lights. I walked each space checking for anything out of place. Saturday arrived clear and cool. By late afternoon, the caterer set up stations in the dining area and on the rooftop patio. The musicians tuned their guitars and tested the small sound system, letting warm notes drift across the garden. My brother placed lanterns at the end of the driveway to guide the first arrivals. Cars began to appear just after sunset. Aunts and uncles stepped out, their voices lifting as they followed the long stone path to the front door. The first guests paused at the sight of the tall glass walls glowing softly against the trees. Whispers of surprise followed as they entered the open living space. Some moved straight to the rooftop garden, marveling at the layered planters and the view of the dark forest beyond. Inside, the sound of quiet admiration carried from group to group. An uncle traced the smooth edge of the kitchen island, asking how long the project had taken. Another relative examined the hidden lighting that washed the hallways in a gentle glow. They moved from room to room, commenting on the custom woodwork and the way the house seemed to blend with the surrounding trees. Vanessa arrived last, as expected. A black car eased up the driveway and she stepped out wearing a polished evening outfit and a confident smile. She walked toward the entrance with the same poised stride she used at every family event, clearly expecting a rented venue or a borrowed space. When I opened the door, she stopped mid-step. Her eyes lifted to the vaulted ceiling and then swept across the open plan. The quiet conversations behind her slowed. For a long moment, she didn't move, taking in the wide glass walls and the soft lights that spilled from the rooftop garden above. Relatives standing nearby watched as she entered. A faint expression of disbelief crossed her face while she glanced from the kitchen to the garden stairs. Guests who had already toured the house shared knowing looks, waiting to see her reaction. I guided her through the rooms while the musicians played gentle notes outside. She ran a hand along the stone counter and paused at the sliding doors that opened to the rooftop. On the patio, the scent of herbs mixed with the cool night air. Lanterns cast patterns of light across the planters filled with rosemary, lavender, and thyme. Family members followed us onto the roof, pointing out the subtle irrigation system and the seating areas tucked among the plants. Someone mentioned how the garden design must have taken months of planning. An aunt asked how I managed to keep it secret for so long. I answered with simple details about the years of slow progress, the early land purchase, and the careful scheduling. Vanessa offered a short compliment about the garden, her voice low. She stayed quiet as others asked questions and took photos, though later she showed hints of mixed feelings as she adjusted to the surprise. Instead, she lingered near the railing, watching the lantern light reflect against the glass panels. The evening moved easily from room to room. Guests tasted the food, sipped drinks, and settled into clusters of conversation. The acoustic duo played a mix of soft folk songs that floated through the open doors. My parents stood near the dining table, greeting each new arrival and sharing small details about the project's timeline. One uncle gathered a group in the kitchen to admire the custom cabinetry. Another relative discovered the hidden drawers in the island and called others to see the smooth mechanisms. Everywhere I looked, family members explored with the excitement of discovering something unexpected. As the night deepened, the rooftop garden became the favorite spot. People settled onto the benches, the forest stretching into darkness below. The scent of herbs carried on the breeze. A cousin remarked that it felt like a retreat far from the city. Another relative whispered about how long it must have taken to plan every detail. Through it all, Vanessa remained mostly silent. She accepted a plate of food and listened as others shared their admiration. When someone asked her about her upcoming Italy trip, she gave a brief answer and returned her attention to the view. By the time the last guest prepared to leave, the house glowed softly under the moonlight. Lanterns lit the driveway as cars pulled away one by one. My parents hugged me and promised to visit again soon. My brother stayed behind to help clean, stacking plates and folding tables while music still lingered in the air. When the final lights dimmed and the house settled again, the quiet felt full of energy from the evening. The rooftop garden shimmered under the stars, the forest surrounding it as still as when I first walked the land years ago. The family had seen everything now, and the house stood ready for whatever came next. I woke late the next morning to a phone buzzing with messages. Cousins sent cheerful notes about how amazing the rooftop garden looked under the lanterns. Aunts thanked me for the evening and asked when they could visit again. Even distant relatives who hadn't attended left voicemails after seeing photos shared in the family group chat. The housewarming glow stretched well into the day. While my screen filled with texts, one name stayed absent. Vanessa didn't send a word. My parents noticed it too. They called mid-morning while driving over with a box of breakfast pastries, laughing about how the family couldn't stop talking about the reveal. When they arrived, they settled at the kitchen island and passed me warm croissants, recounting how an uncle said it was the best family gathering in years. They exchanged amused looks at the quiet from Vanessa's side of the family thread. A soft knock at the front door interrupted our coffee. My next-door neighbor stood there holding a basket woven from willow branches, filled with homemade bread, small jars of honey, and a card with his name and number. He welcomed me officially to the street and mentioned a neighborhood tradition of sharing gardening tips. We walked to the rooftop garden where he admired the herb layout and suggested we swap seedlings in spring. Later in the afternoon, I headed to my studio office downtown. Word of the house had already traveled through the neighborhood to one of my clients, who mentioned it to a colleague of mine. By the time I reached my desk, coworkers were curious. A designer friend cornered me with a grin, asking how I'd hidden such an extensive build for years, and I briefly explained that early land purchase and steady savings had made it possible. A project manager joked about scheduling a team dinner on the rooftop. Just before lunch, my phone lit with a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Vanessa's husband. His tone was warm as he complimented the design and said the rooftop garden was unreal. He added gently that Vanessa was quiet after the gathering, taking in how much work it must have been. I thanked him and promised he and Vanessa were welcome to visit again anytime. That evening, my brother stopped by carrying a long box. Inside was a set of high-quality gardening tools, polished wood handles and stainless steel blades. He said it was a housewarming gift for expanding the rooftop beds. We unpacked them together, lining them on the potting bench near the herb planters. The next day, a cousin called with a piece of gossip. Apparently, Vanessa had implied to a few relatives that I must have inherited money from an unknown source to pay for the house. The rumor picked up enough that an aunt asked my parents about it. My parents arrived at the house later and mentioned it over tea. I calmly explained again that the house came from years of savings, careful investments, and steady project work, nothing more. They nodded, already aware but wanting to be sure the story stayed straight. Meanwhile, photos from the housewarming continued to circulate. A neighbor who attended shared a few rooftop shots with the local community association. Soon, I received a polite email from a neighborhood coordinator asking if they could include a picture of the rooftop garden in their monthly bulletin. After a neighbor who attended shared a few photos at a local meeting. I agreed as long as the location stayed general. By midweek, a new message appeared in my inbox from a regional lifestyle magazine. They wanted to feature the garden in a hidden gems column about unique local spaces. They praised the balance of modern design and natural setting and requested an interview. After a brief call, I declined kindly, explaining that I preferred to keep the home private and away from wider attention. The editor thanked me and said the door was open if I changed my mind. Late one evening, just as I was cleaning the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a short text. It was from Vanessa. "Nice place. Didn't know you liked modern design." That was all. I typed a simple reply. "Thank you." Nothing more. When my brother heard about it, he laughed and said he half expected her to send a long essay or a list of questions. We stood on the rooftop with cups of tea, trading jokes about how long it had taken for that one-line message to arrive. The garden smelled of rosemary and mint as we talked. After he left, I stayed outside under the stars. The forest stretched dark and quiet beyond the lantern glow. I planted a few new herbs in the corner beds, using the new tools he had given me, the metal edges cutting clean lines in the soil. The soft scrape of trowel against earth mixed with the night sounds of insects and a distant owl. Messages continued to arrive through the evening, relatives sharing more photos, neighbors offering plant cuttings, colleagues asking when they could visit. The house felt full of movement even in silence. The week closed with another visit from my parents. They brought a small basket of late summer tomatoes from their garden and spent the afternoon walking the rooftop paths, pointing out where more planters might fit. We discussed adding a few fruit trees along the driveway next spring. My father admired the irrigation system while my mother clipped a small bundle of lavender to take home. As the sun dropped and the sky shifted to deep blue, I lit the lanterns one by one. Their warm glow reflected on the glass panels, and the herbs released a stronger scent in the cooling air. The house stood calm around me, every corner a reminder of the quiet years of planning and work that had led here. No dramatic words, no sudden confrontations, just steady signs of how much had changed. Family members kept visiting in small groups, neighbors stopped by with ideas, and the story of the house found its own way through the community without me needing to say much at all. When night finally settled, I stayed in the garden, watering the new herbs under a sky scattered with stars. The cool breeze carried the faint sound of distant city traffic, soft enough to feel worlds away. The house and the garden held the day's quiet progress, a calm rhythm that felt like the natural next step after the surprise of the housewarming. The week after the housewarming felt like a calm breeze through the neighborhood, but I wanted to keep the new home from becoming a one-time surprise. On Tuesday evening, I sent a round of messages inviting the closer relatives to a Sunday brunch. I kept it casual, homemade pastries, coffee, and a relaxed walk through the garden. My parents offered to bring fruit, and my brother volunteered to handle drinks. Replies trickled in quickly, aunts and uncles confirming, cousins asking what they could bring, grandparents excited to see the garden in daylight. Only Vanessa stayed quiet. Hours passed, then a full day. Late Thursday, her husband sent a quick note saying they'd try to come if schedules allowed. Sunday morning arrived bright and cool. I woke early, started the ovens, and filled the kitchen with the smell of butter and cinnamon. Fresh scones baked while coffee brewed in large carafes. My brother arrived first with juice and sparkling water. We set tables both indoors and on the rooftop patio, leaving the sliding doors wide open so the house felt like one long space between forest and sky. The first guest stepped through the front door, just as the last tray of pastries left the oven. Warm air carried the scent of rosemary from the rooftop herbs. Relatives drifted from room to room, pausing to admire how sunlight cut across the stone floors and glass walls. An aunt exclaimed over the way the indoor plants blended into the garden view outside. Soon the conversations shifted toward design and landscaping. Uncles asked about the type of wood used in the cabinetry, and cousins took notes on the rooftop irrigation system. Someone leaned over the railing to study how the garden beds layered with native flowers. No one talked about luxury handbags or far-flung vacations. The focus stayed on the details of the house and the garden's quiet beauty. Midway through the morning, Vanessa arrived with her husband. She wore a simple jacket and carried a small basket of fruit. Guests greeted them warmly, folding them into the circle around the kitchen island. Vanessa walked slowly through the rooms, eyes moving along the high ceilings and soft light. When the group moved to the rooftop, she stopped beside a patch of lavender and spoke softly that the garden was beautiful and clever. The words came without her usual flourish, and several relatives glanced at one another in surprise. I led a short tour, explaining how the irrigation system worked with collected rainwater and how the native plants required less upkeep while attracting pollinators. Cousins asked about soil depth and drainage. I showed them the hidden layers beneath the planters. Everyone gathered close as the acoustic hum of bees floated between herbs. A cousin curious about costs asked how I managed the budget for such a project. I explained that buying the land early kept the price low, and that years of steady savings and careful planning made each stage possible without loans. The practical details drew nods and more questions about timing and contractors. The mood felt different from past family gatherings. Vanessa listened more than she spoke. She leaned against the railing while others shared stories about their own small projects, kitchen renovations, garden plans, backyard decks. Instead of steering the conversation to her travels or purchases, she stayed with the group, asking about plant varieties and the best times to prune lavender. Inside, an aunt brought out a plate of warm scones and asked for the recipe. We traded notes on measurements and baking times while cousins sampled the extras. My brother joked that the brunch beat any cafe in town, drawing a round of easy laughter. During a break in conversation, a neighbor strolled past on the road below and called up a compliment about the front landscaping, saying how striking it looked from the street. A few relatives leaned over the balcony to wave, grinning at the unexpected praise. As midday sun shifted to gentle afternoon light, guests began gathering their things. Vanessa lingered near the sliding doors after most people had left. She walked a slow circle through the main room, eyes tracing the clean lines of the furniture and the view beyond the glass. Before leaving, she paused by the kitchen counter and said quietly, "You really pulled this off." The simple words carried more weight than a dozen speeches. She reached into her bag and placed a small bouquet of freshly cut flowers on the counter, wild daisies and sprigs of mint tied with twine. Then she joined her husband at the door and waved a short goodbye. When the last car disappeared down the driveway, I stepped outside for a slow walk around the property. The late afternoon air smelled of pine and warm stone. Birds settled in the trees as the sun dipped lower. The rooftop lanterns flicked on one by one as the sky darkened, their soft light outlining the garden beds. The house stood quiet again, but the energy felt different, lighter somehow. Conversations from the brunch replayed in the stillness. Cousins trading plans for their own gardens, aunts laughing over the scone recipe, Vanessa asking careful questions about soil and sunlight. The family dynamic had shifted in subtle ways, like a gentle turn of the season, and the evening settled around me with a quiet promise of more easy gatherings to come. A week after the brunch, the lifestyle magazine that had first contacted me sent another email. This time the editor explained they wanted to feature only the rooftop garden's sustainable design, no mention of my full name or address. They offered to focus on the irrigation system and native plants, highlighting how the project could inspire others to create eco-friendly spaces in the city. I agreed under strict conditions. They could use first name only, no street name, and any wide shots had to blur surrounding landmarks. The editor confirmed every detail in writing, promising full privacy. We set a sunrise appointment for the following Tuesday to capture the garden at its best light. The photographer arrived before dawn, carrying lenses and soft reflectors. The air was cool and faint mist clung to the herbs. As the first rays of sun touched the planters, he moved silently, snapping images of the lavender, thyme, and small citrus trees. He climbed a ladder for overhead shots and crouched near the irrigation lines to highlight the subtle engineering. By the time the city fully woke, he had filled memory cards with every angle. 2 weeks later, the article appeared online. It described the rooftop garden as a hidden sanctuary of native blooms and practical innovation. Readers saw diagrams of the rainwater collection system and close-ups of the stone pathways glowing in early light. The story spread quickly through local groups and professional design circles. Neighbors stopped me on evening walks to say they'd recognized the garden from the photographs, thrilled that our quiet street had gained such a reputation for creativity. Soon messages began arriving from homeowners across the city. Some wanted tips on building small green roofs, others asked about low-maintenance native plants for urban balconies. I answered each politely, sharing general advice and pointing them toward resources I had used. A week after the article launched, I received a call from a boutique hotel owner downtown. She admired the feature and asked if I would consult on a new green roof project for her property. We set a meeting for later in the month to discuss design ideas and budget. My parents found the article in print at a local bookstore and bought several copies. During their next visit, they carried the magazine into the kitchen like a trophy. They had already sent photos of the spread to relatives, who responded with excited texts about how proud they were to see my work recognized. Among those messages came a pleasant surprise. Vanessa sent a note congratulating me on the feature, calling the garden inspiring. Her tone was gracious, without any of the clipped edge from her earlier text. Later that evening, she followed with an invitation to meet for coffee, just the two of us. We met at a quiet cafe near the river on a mild Friday morning. The place smelled of fresh bread and dark roast coffee. We chose a small table by the window where sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. After ordering, we eased into conversation about the article, the brunch, and the rooftop garden. I described how I'd chosen each plant for low water needs and how privacy mattered more to me than attention. Vanessa listened closely and then admitted something unexpected. She said she often bought expensive items and told big travel stories because financial stress made her insecure. The bragging was her way of hiding the pressure of bills and the worry about keeping up appearances. She looked relieved as she explained it, almost like setting down a heavy bag. I shared that I'd always preferred quiet choices and long projects over flashy purchases, which is why I never corrected her assumptions about me. We both laughed at how different our approaches were and how easily we'd misunderstood each other. The conversation turned toward family gatherings. We agreed that competition had often shaped those events: who traveled more, who bought the newest gadget, who drove the newest car. We both wanted that to change. We talked about encouraging others to share real stories instead of trying to impress. Before we left, I offered to help her start a small herb garden on her condo balcony. We sketched a quick plan on a napkin, listing pots of basil, mint, and thyme. She brightened at the idea and said she'd clear a space that weekend. As we walked out of the cafe, she suggested we meet again soon to choose plants. We agreed to keep family comparisons out of future conversations, focusing instead on what we genuinely enjoyed. That afternoon, I stopped at a garden supply store and picked up a few starter herbs and a compact drip system, thinking they would be perfect for her balcony. I texted her a photo of the supplies and she replied with a thumbs up and a smile emoji. The next few days moved quickly. Neighbors continued to mention the magazine feature, and a few community groups asked if I could give a small talk about native plants. I kept my schedule light, preferring to focus on the upcoming hotel consultation and the idea of helping Vanessa with her new project. My brother dropped by one evening with more gardening gear and teased that I was about to turn the entire family into rooftop farmers. We stood on the patio watching the lanterns flick on, while he described ideas for his own apartment balcony. By the end of the week, the garden felt livelier than ever. The scent of mint carried on the breeze while soft lights glowed along the pathways. I walked the perimeter of the roof, thinking about the quiet coffee conversation and the easy agreement we had reached. For the first time, the connection with Vanessa seemed free of the old tension. The house and garden had started as a personal retreat, a slow project built in silence. Now they had become a bridge to new opportunities and a more honest family bond. As the night settled over the trees, the rooftop lanterns flickered gently, reflecting the steady, thoughtful changes that had taken root in every corner of my life. Cool mornings settled over the forest as autumn moved in. The rooftop garden shifted colors with the season, lavender fading while the herbs kept their deep green. I started most days checking the drip lines and swapping summer flowers for hardy late bloomers. The air smelled of pine and damp soil while lanterns flickered faintly in the early light. One crisp morning, I met the boutique hotel owner at her property downtown. She walked me across the flat roof that overlooked a busy street and explained her plan for a guest garden with quiet seating. We sketched ideas for native plants that would handle city wind and for an irrigation system like the one on my roof. She signed the consulting agreement before we finished coffee, and we scheduled the first design session for the following week. Back home that afternoon, I prepared a planting kit for Vanessa's balcony. Small pots of basil, thyme, and mint lined the counter beside a compact drip system. She arrived with a bright notebook and a small camera to record the setup. We worked side by side measuring sunlight spots, filling pots, and connecting the simple tubing. By evening, her balcony smelled of fresh soil and herbs, the start of her own small garden. Days passed in a steady rhythm. I visited the hotel site to present a full design plan: native grasses, water-efficient irrigation, and curved seating nooks. The hotel's project manager approved every detail and asked for a timeline before the holidays. The rooftop would become a green retreat above the busy downtown blocks. One Friday, my aunt invited the family to a large dinner at her house. She wanted to celebrate the new projects and the shift she had noticed in family gatherings. When I arrived, the rooms were full of conversation about gardens and autumn recipes. Relatives asked about the hotel design and about Vanessa's new balcony herbs. Vanessa entered with a small basket of fresh mint she had grown herself. She handed it to the group with a quick smile, and everyone gathered around to see the neat leaves and inhale the bright scent. Cousins asked how she managed such healthy plants in a city apartment, and she explained the simple watering system and the advice I'd given her. The focus stayed balanced as stories moved between new projects, recipes, and plans for the coming holidays. During dinner, my brother raised a glass and offered a toast. He spoke about how sharing ideas had brought everyone closer and how the family felt more connected than it had in years. Laughter followed, and several relatives tapped their glasses in agreement. The evening carried on with easy energy, no one trying to dominate the conversation. When dessert ended, a neighbor who had helped me with my first move stopped by briefly to compliment the garden's autumn colors. He mentioned that local community leaders were discussing a seasonal tour of unique gardens and wondered if I would consider joining. I said I'd think about it and thanked him for the kind words. After the dinner, Vanessa pulled me aside near the door. She quietly thanked me for showing her a different way to enjoy projects and success. She said the balcony garden had become her favorite part of the day and that she planned to expand it with winter herbs. I told her I'd help her pick plants that could handle the colder air. The next morning, I walked the rooftop garden with a notebook, marking areas to refresh with late-season flowers and new herbs. The air was crisp and the forest below shimmered with gold leaves. As I trimmed lavender stems, my phone buzzed with messages from the hotel project team approving final material orders. A neighbor sent a note asking for advice on a smaller green roof for his garage, and a cousin requested a list of hardy plants for a shaded backyard. Later that week, I met Vanessa downtown for coffee again. We compared notes on the balcony garden's progress and discussed ideas for winter planting. She showed photos of the mint sprouting new leaves and asked about adding a small bench to enjoy the space. I suggested a lightweight cedar seat and offered to help assemble it. Back at my own house, I prepared for a small weekend gathering. I set lanterns along the driveway and filled vases with late-blooming flowers. My parents arrived early with baskets of apples from their orchard, and my brother carried in jars of homemade cider. Guests from the neighborhood followed, curious to see the autumn changes in the rooftop garden. They wandered through the warm lights and asked about the new hotel project. I explained the plan and mentioned how Vanessa's balcony garden had inspired other relatives to start their own small plots. A few neighbors shared their own ideas for container gardens and asked for tips on soil blends. As the evening settled, the garden glowed under a clear night sky. The herbs released a fresh scent as people talked quietly along the stone paths. Vanessa arrived late with her husband, carrying a tray of mint tea made from her own harvest. She poured cups for everyone, and the group gathered to taste the bright flavor. Conversation flowed easily around the rooftop. Family members exchanged planting tips and swapped recipes. The hotel owner dropped by to see the garden in its autumn state and mentioned the first steps of construction beginning next month. She asked if I could lead a community workshop once the hotel garden opened, an idea that excited the neighbors listening nearby. When the night wound down, relatives left in small groups, carrying cuttings and seeds I had set aside. Vanessa lingered for a moment at the garden's edge, looking over the forest as lanterns flickered. She thanked me again for helping her start the balcony garden and said she hoped to host a spring gathering once her plants were in full bloom. After everyone left, I walked the perimeter of the rooftop slowly. The forest stretched dark and calm beyond the glow of the lanterns. The sound of distant crickets mixed with the soft drip of the irrigation lines. The house stood quiet yet alive, carrying the steady rhythm of projects and connections that had grown through the months. The next morning brought a flurry of new messages. The hotel team sending updated blueprints, neighbors asking for planting advice, cousins sharing photos of their first herb sprouts. I spent the day responding, planning, and making notes for future designs. As autumn deepened, the garden continued to thrive. Each step across the stone paths felt like a new chapter. Family ties stronger, neighbors inspired, professional projects expanding. What began as a private dream had become a place where ideas, relationships, and quiet growth unfolded naturally, each season adding another layer to the story.